Hey, what's up? It's Seamus. I'm going to start this with a post that I saw on LinkedIn the other day that went semi-viral. It was by this guy named Sam Obletz, who announced to everyone in the marketing field that you could get your brand in front of more people for $0 up front. And I was like totally fascinated. I was like, how is that even possible? So I did some digging and research on this guy and what he's building. And there's something that a lot of marketers and founders should know. He's building this company called Claim, which was just funded $4 million by Sequoia. They're the same firm that invested in Apple, Airbnb, Instacart, and they just invested in this company. And I was fascinated about his story, so I decided to invite him on the show. And it was crazy. He mentioned to me that at just 11 or 12 years old, he decided to put his studies on the back burner and build a company. He ended up scaling that to $10,000 in revenue with his friend, starting in middle school, which is insane. We're going to get into that. But before we do, if you could hit the subscribe button down below, I'd greatly appreciate it. It helps the channel more than you can imagine. And the bigger the show gets, the bigger the guests we can have on the show. Thank you very much. And now we're going to hear from Sam on what he's doing to get his app to go viral and how they're going to take on Facebook and advertising. Sam, thanks for taking the time to join the episode. I'm excited for this one. To understand how your startup Claim is going to change advertising forever, I want to start with your personal story. What would be the earliest piece of context that I would have to know about you to understand the person sitting in front of me today?
Yeah, well, first of all, Seamus, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this opportunity to spend some time with you and talk a little bit about the Claim story. So I grew up in a family of my parents and my younger brother, who's 3 years younger than I am. And what's important to know is I had the tremendous opportunity to explore and create during my childhood, but also see two particularly strong role models in my parents. And to me, they embodied tenacity, grit, and teamwork. And they really espoused that through athletics. And so we grew up on the road a lot. And by that, I mean, we would travel the world and my parents would race. And my mom was a college swimmer at Stanford, turned national champion, and then competed doing Ironman triathlons around the world. My dad, marathoner, competed at the world level in duathlons, which is running and biking. My younger brother ended up going to Stanford. He walked on to first the the cross-country team, and then the crew team, and then became a naval officer afterwards. And as kind of the athletic runt of the family, I did have the opportunity to see what effort looked like, what passion looked like, and to see that on full display through the hard times of kind of seeing the pain on my parents' faces as they were going through these grueling physical activities. And that definitely shaped what I think hard work looks like. So I would say that kind of, from the earliest, I would say precognition or pre-consciousness level, that has pervaded kind of who I am as a person from the earliest stage.
And you learned a lot about hard work when you were younger. What are some of the ways that at that younger age you decided to work hard and was a hard worker?
Yeah. So I would say the entrepreneurial bug was kind of placed within me at that young age. And I'll give you a couple examples. I was probably 11 or 12, just entering middle school, 6th, 7th grade. And my friend and I decided we wanted to, kind of put our studies, quote unquote, on the back burner and instead try to build a company. So we researched what we could. Again, this is probably 2005-ish, 2004 maybe. And we built a computer integration company. So we called it Hailstorm PC, inspired by the famous Pacific Northwest weather. We went out and bought a number of parts off things like Newegg. We assembled those computers and then we marketed them publicly, mostly on Craigslist. And the price point for us at the time, we thought it was high end. We would sell computers for $800 to $1,600. They'd be Xeon-based, workstations or gaming rigs. And we poured our heart and soul into that effort for what came to be very little financial return. But certainly it was the first time I realized, wow, it is incredible to try to build something from zero, build something from scratch. And boy, does it require a lot of hard work. The funny part is we'd show up to deliver these computers and, to be completely honest, there weren't more than a dozen or so that we ended up selling. But we'd show up to deliver them. And I'm not sure exactly what the customers thought at the time about these two middle schoolers delivering their $1,000 PC. But I'm hoping that they thought that, this company was scrappy and hired cheap delivery for what was assembled by professionals. So that was kind of one. The other example I'd offer from kind of at the entrepreneurship intersection with hard work is late middle school, early high school. I started building a freelance web design company. And again, I think this is a good example of hiding behind a keyboard with the internet in the early to late 2000s. But people didn't know I was 14, 15 years old. And I fell in love with Illustrator. I fell in love with Photoshop, fell in love with HTML. And I would build these sites and deliver them to customers. And it's amazing how much cash flow you can generate as somebody in late middle school, early high school, when you're fortunate not to have to pay rent. And so I would pour so much time into these two endeavors. And again, it kind of reinforced this cycle to me, this virtuous cycle that with enough kind of tenacity, you can find your way within uncertain times. Now, web design, building computers, far less certain, far clearer roadmap than what we're doing with Claim now, some decades later, but definitely the first kind of twinkles that I experienced at that time.
Yeah, your journey with web development and building computers kind of reminds me of when I was in ninth grade when I started a phone repair business. When I started to learn about how to repair phones and computers, I just went on YouTube and watched this guy named Hugh Jeffries who does a lot of phone repairs. And that's how I learned. But I mean, back then, YouTube wasn't even a thing, really. At least they weren't doing tutorials. So how did you learn how to work computers and repair them?
I had a partner in crime. We launched that Hailstorm PC company I mentioned. We both were geeks. From a hardware perspective, we tried to figure out what worked, nicely in the sandbox together. From a software perspective, we were hacking around BIOS, the registry editor in Windows. We were just learning as we went. And it was very much a trial and error process. I'm so thankful for YouTube now, by the way. I love spending my time when I'm not looking at a screen, working on things like snow machines, snowmobiles, dirt bike engines, aircraft. And boy, it would be a lot harder to learn now without YouTube.
Before we get into the backstory of Claim and what you're doing today, I want to delve into the problem first. Yeah. What's wrong with advertising today?
Oh boy, here we go. So let's attack this both from kind of a consumer lens as well as the merchant or kind of advertiser lens. Let's start with the merchant lens first. I actually think that most people don't realize how difficult it is to be a marketer today. There are a few reasons for that, and then I'll kind of aggregate those up to the picture of how we see the world. The first is that the cost to acquire a customer right now is more expensive than ever, and we see this in the data. The cost per acquisition, CPA in kind of marketing parlance, has overall tripled over the past 8 years. So that's number one, is it is very difficult to make your P&L really pencil right now, given the cost that it takes to go reach and get that customer in the door for the first time. So that's one. The second aspect is actually figuring out how to attribute where that customer came from is more complex than ever. And we see entire industries, billion-dollar industries, developed around multi-touch attribution and assigning value to where that customer came in the door. And unfortunately, it's becoming more and more opaque, especially for the end user here who is the marketer. It's kind of a fool's errand in a way. And so that's complicating the picture. And then lastly, these kind of industry-wide developments with good intent, by the way, the phasing out of cookies from a Google perspective, Apple's do not track or anti-tracking technology in the iOS system. These further complicate the ability of the marketer to say, how do I find the right customers? How do I reach those customers? How do I bring them in the door? And how do I know how I brought them in the door? And so marketers are being put in this impossible position. Again, this is kind of the sum total of that difficulty right now, where they're being asked to grow top line by their leadership teams, by their investors, by their shareholders. They're being asked to cut marketing spend, being asked to grow gross margins and operating margins. And they're given kind of a legacy set of tools to do so. Things like Google AdWords, which reinvented, or rather invented, early advertising on the internet. Things like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. These are legacy tools. I think it's important to remember Facebook, Instagram, these things have been around for over a decade, if not longer. And so it's an aging suite of tools coupled with a really difficult macro picture for marketers.
Why is it so difficult to figure out where consumers are coming from on that merchant lens?
Yeah, so we'll talk kind of attribution 101 here. The earliest version of this probably goes back to like the Mad Men days, if not sooner, right? Where you're seeing a billboard or a television ad, and that's what we kind of call today awareness marketing. And so how can you really tick and tie somebody who watches the Temu Super Bowl ad to somebody who makes the purchase? You really can't at the end of the day. And so this whole industry of performance marketing that's worth tens and tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars per quarter, really arose to answer that question. So if I click a link on Instagram, can I track through from seeing that with my eyeballs through making a purchase on the website? And the answer is kind of, provided that you make a lot of assumptions around where to ascribe trust and authenticity within that system. And so performance marketing to me is inadequate in its current state for brands because it is nearly impossible to know. Is it because you saw this one ad and that ad drove you to make this purchase? And that's going to only get harder and harder, as I mentioned, because of tracking being pulled out of the system by sort of thematic regulatory constraints.
Yeah, I think it's also extremely difficult to gain attention now because of how much content is already out there. And for brands,
if you want a hot take, I think that traditional advertising markets like this are going to break in the next few years if we continue down the trend of ChatGPT, LLMs oversaturating the market. I mean, if an LLM right now is able to operate at some non-trivial percentile of human cognition, then it's going to be harder than ever to know whether the eyeballs, air quotes, that saw an ad were truly human than not. And that's going to throw a wrench in terms of the generative capability of advertising for attribution in the next few years.
It's interesting because I never thought of it like that. I always thought about, ChatGPT and AI being used to create content. I think for the most part that ends up creating lower quality content depending on what it is. But I didn't think about it on the other side, is if they're actually viewing it and to actually know if somebody who's viewing it is a person or not. It's an interesting perspective.
And I think that's a perfect segue, Seamus, into the consumer side, because what we're talking about now is that consumer attention is at an all-time low, which is, again, feeding into kind of the vicious cycle of CPAs or cost of acquisitions being at an all-time high, because we are absolutely inundated with advertising all day on our screens in real life. And the net total of that is, personally, and this is part of the inspiration for Claim, disillusionment. But if anything, it's desensitization to these brands that are trying to grab our attention when we're not on Instagram to be sold things. We're not walking down the street to be sold things. So it's a rude interruption in our day, which I would argue has an economic drain on our society as well.
So how are you guys solving this problem through Claim? We've mentioned your new business a couple of times, but let's dig deep into what you guys are doing to actually fix this issue.
Yeah, so maybe helpful to kind of fill in a little bit of the picture here on what inspired us to start Claim. We'll start with kind of the disillusionment aspect that I mentioned. I grew up with Facebook. At the end of college, I want to say 2013-ish, I deleted my Facebook entirely, not deactivated, but deleted, because I felt two things. One, the sort of dopamine loop is real, and I felt myself getting dragged more and more into checking Facebook often at the expense of real world relationships and time better spent elsewhere. But two, I got tired of the fourth or fifth direct to consumer company trying to reach me on Facebook when, again, I was not there to be sold to. So I deleted Facebook and I never got an Instagram. I think it's kind of a funny paradox in a way that we have a consumer internet advertising founder who never had an Instagram. And so it's a known blind spot. And I'm able to fill that in with really talented folks on our team. But it speaks to my belief that the current system is broken. And going forward, we've built Claim almost to be the anti-Instagram and the anti-direction that a lot of these platforms are going, which started as true connections. They started as what are my friends doing today, much like Be Real still is. And they've expanded in scope to not what are my friends up to, but who is this influencer who's trying to market to me? What is this celebrity doing? And the density of those networks has become more diffuse. And so I'm glad that I'm not on Instagram, frankly. So that's one. The second aspect of starting Claim came from this feeling that a lot of our digital interactions are more transactional than ever right now. There's a story that I tell with my co-founder where he did something really great for the company. He shipped a feature way ahead of schedule for us, and it was a step change for the company. I thought about what I could do to thank him for doing that. And I kind of considered three options. I could go downstairs. I could, recite his favorite coffee order by heart, get him that coffee at the coffee shop, bring it back up and give it to him. That's one. I could, hand him a $5 gift card to that coffee shop as a second way of thanking him. Or I could just slap $5 down on the table in front of him, and all of those would have the same monetary value. But I think we all realize that there's one right answer in that sort of decision matrix, and it's get him the thing that he loves because I know him. And I feel like so much of our digital interactions in the past decades have been reduced to bits, to ones and zeros, to transactions on things like Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, and the like. And we've lost some of that emotional connection. And there's something about that is deeply human that we're missing. And so we wanted to bring back that sort of emotional connection through interaction, through authenticity with Claim. And then the last aspect of this, and what I think Claim will become kind of a generational company on the consumer side, is we were looking around at the world a few years ago, and we were saying, wow, there are some really interesting things going on here that we're seeing in places like Web3, in gaming, etc., around digital ownership of private property. If you think about the way that our society functions in the United States, it is very much dictated by private property ownership. And so I don't think it takes a massive leap to believe that in the future, if private property ownership were, essentially sacrosanct on the internet, that would transform how our society functions, perhaps by multiples because of the distribution of the internet. And so part of the inspiration from Claim is early tests around what could private property ownership on the internet look like. And of course, Claim has definitely, course corrected and made adjustments over time, but that sort of ethos still underpins a lot of our work as a company. So those were kind of the three epiphanies or aha moments when we started Claim.
And how did you and your co-founder meet, and why did you decide to go into business together?
Yeah, I love this. It's so central to our story. There was an admissions officer in the undergraduate admissions department at Yale who decided for whatever reason to put my co-founder and I together as roommates. And it was a stroke of luck because we really clicked, and we ended up living together all 4 years in undergrad. We kind of said our goodbyes. He went off to go work in the Bay Area. After school, I went to go work in New York. But we always had this thought that one day we wanted to start something together. And I think part of me in my mind always held this place of admiration for my dad because he started a company with his best friend back in the 1980s. And when he did something that I thought was really powerful. He said, I'm going to write a letter to you, being his best friend, and here's what I value about you as a person. Here are all the things that I admire in you and why I'm so excited to intertwine our lives even further in an uncertain venture. But here are the things that are non-negotiables for us. And here are the reasons that we need to maintain our friendship in the face of, adversity as a business. And so I knew that I wanted to go start a company, and I wanted to do so with my co-founder, Tap. And so that ended up changing my life for the better. I wanted to go find Tap. I knew I needed to poach him for whatever he was up to at the time. He was in business school at Harvard doing a joint degree between the engineering school and HBS. And so I applied there. I was really fortunate to get in. And then we did the whiteboard thing in our dorm room. We lived together again. And before we took the leap of faith, I wrote him a letter. And, my dad actually brought out the letter that he wrote not too long ago. And it was kind of amazing. It makes you think about nature, nurture a lot. But the same themes were present there in the letter that I wrote Tap, saying, here's what I admire about you. Here's why I'm so excited. In the letter that was dated 1982 from my dad.
And at Harvard Business School, what are some of the startup ideation ideas that you were brainstorming at that time?
Oh, man. Okay. Trip down memory lane. we had a whiteboard in our room. We overbuilt this matrix to evaluate different ideas, which was silly. It's kind of a saying in business school that there are four horsemen of the MBA apocalypse, meaning what are the ideas that rear their ugly heads every single MBA class, and yet every single MBA thinks that they are world-changing ideas in no particular order. It's an alcohol delivery app, it's a dating app, it's an English tutoring app, and it's a meetup or networking app. And I won't lie, we evaluated some things in those four. The two that we ended up exploring more, one was a take on streamlining the immigration system, the skilled immigration system in the US. It's appalling to me that we have a country that doesn't support bringing great people here, highly skilled laborers. The H-1B system, going through it now for one of our teammates, it's broken. Whereas you look at our neighbor to the north, Canada, and they are welcoming skilled immigrants to Canada. And in fact, I think it's kind of a global competition issue for the United States, but without going too deep down that, because that's certainly a rabbit hole, we didn't feel like we had good founder market fit there. And so we moved on to a second idea that we spent more time on in the computer vision space. And that one we felt was really mission driven. The idea was, how can we equip lower skilled technicians, meaning nurse practitioners, physician's assistants at the highest level, or physicians in rural areas with better capabilities to identify disease, things like lung cancer, things like breast cancer, et cetera. Again, the reason that we ended up letting that idea go, aside from business model considerations, was founder market fit. My co-founder had great expertise in computer vision, but we certainly didn't have medical expertise, and it wasn't something that we felt that we could personally speak to.
Interesting. I like the personal backstory behind that and how that led to Claim. I think to understand how you guys are solving the issue, I want to bring back or touch on something you previously said. How do you bring back that emotional connection through Claim?
Yeah, awesome question. I think part of it starts with a consistency and design that feels opinionated and consistent. So what do I mean by that? If you play with Claim, it should give you nostalgic vibes. The logo is inspired by Nintendo, but it is a very clear and consistent departure from what I call the 2010s fintech UI stack. So it feels like you're kind of having this different experience as one. Secondly, your friends are already on the platform, and we'll talk about growth in a minute if it's of interest, but we've launched in really dense social networks on purpose. And so with authenticity being kind of the key word here, when you use Claim, you're seeing what your friends are up to actively, where they are shopping, where they are discovering new things, and it's done in a non-transactional way. And I think that is kind of the beauty at the heart of Claim is, if we're talking about shopping and customer acquisition and brand discovery, the beating heart of that is transactions. It's the ones and zeros and the dollar signs that I mentioned, but we've managed to rip out the feeling of transactions from the platform. And one of the ways we do that is by pushing numbers under the hood as much as we can. And we ran a number of A/B tests and kind of interviews around this. And there is a very different reaction to if I put a brand in front of you and the opportunity to try that brand, and we say iced coffee, than if I say 20% off or $5 off. In a way, it gets you to react more emotionally to something. You can picture it in your mind. It feels like it's yours, more so than it feels like, oh, here we go again. I'm operating in the left brain. So the combination of a dense social network plus treating objects or brands as discrete things, not numbers, is part of the secret sauce with Claim.
So that's really interesting. It's something that I actually want to break down. So, for example, let's say I'm a student at one of the universities that you currently support. I download the app, sign up. What are the first things that I'm seeing and I'm interacting with on the platform?
Yeah, so we'll drop you onto the activity feed, which, talking to the early folks at Venmo, a lot of people ask why Venmo had an activity feed. Like, why do I need to see my friends paying each other rent or paying each other back for pizza? And at the beginning and still today, that's to really drive home the point that there is activity happening here. This thing is real. It is credible. It's trustworthy. And so in the same way, we drop you on the activity feed on Claim, and you can see the pace of interaction that's occurring on the platform. Today's Thursday, which is Claim Drop Day. We can talk about the mechanics later, but if you open up the app right now, you're seeing hundreds of activities happening on the platform per minute. And what's cool about that is you're kind of immersed in this world. If there's some moving and shaking going on here, and among my friends, which is the key point. So that's one. The second kind of aspect of what we do is focus on these moments. I just mentioned Drop Day. That was partly inspired by Be Real, saying it's time to be real, by HQ Trivia. There's really something special about timed internet functions and kind of conditioning people to expect timed internet to occur. So what do I mean by that? We send a text to everyone at 11 a.m. Eastern on Thursdays, and we say, the drop's here, come grab your claim. And people look forward to that. I mean, I've had students tell me that Claim is a bright spot in their week. They look forward to this. It's not only an excuse to try a new brand, but go with a friend. And I think that experience, bringing back that social experience of trying something new together, is really powerful. Whether it's online and you're buying a new tea together on a website, or if it's you're going and trying a new restaurant for the first time, when you associate that with a social experience, you tend to value it higher. Not to mention, if you do work, you're going to value that experience higher. It's kind of the classic IKEA effect in consumer psychology.
And given that it's harder than ever to reach consumers nowadays, especially college students, how did you get your first 100 users in each of these campuses?
Yeah, so huge kudos to Caroline, who runs growth for us. And what we've done is borrowed a lot from our predecessors, companies like Be Real, Gas App, Tinder. What are the growth marketing or field marketing strategies that were used there, but also Venmo. And so what we do on a new college campus is first we identify the right college campus we want to launch at. And we look at student population, we look at the dynamics of that campus. How dense is it? Where do students live? What's the quality of food on that campus? What brand partners are proximate to that campus? What e-commerce companies we want to market to that campus? And once we've identified the campus, we use kind of a three-pronged strategy. We hire college ambassadors, nothing particularly new there, but we use them to gather on-the-ground intelligence, and we give them 5 to 6 discrete tasks to help us with. Hey, introduce us to 10 sorority, fraternity, or student group leaders on campus. Tell us about the places that people love to meet up at. Tell us about the restaurants that people love to go try with their friends. And so we have that kind of on-the-ground knowledge. We then launch partnerships with key organizations on campus. At Harvard, it was the Undergraduate Women in Business Organization and the Automotive Society became kind of our key partners. We may or may not financially incentivize that group, depending on the organization. But what they end up doing is the student group leaders will say, hey, to our members, try Claim, and our invitation will get dropped into group chats, and that helps us spread one to many very quickly. We also work with either paid influencers or micro influencers on campus, or we get a lot of organic content on Instagram and TikTok about this sort of delightful experience that Claim brings. And so those are kind of three strategies we use. We also have a wait list, again, looking at what companies like Gas App have done in the past. We've had several students try so hard to get on to Claim. I know one University of Nevada, Las Vegas student, for example, in the last week has tried 62 times to sign up with her email address, and UNLV isn't a school we currently support, but the wait list shows us essentially where there is student appetite to go next. And so we can reach out to those users. Hey, do you want to become an ambassador? Do you want to become one of our launch partners, and launch with kind of a friendly welcoming party on these campuses? But to be honest, Seamus, it's scrappy. It's feet on the street. It's boots on the ground. If there were a silver bullet to capturing the majority of a college campus, I think we'd see a lot more companies do it. We've just started to build our own replicable playbook over time.
We spoke a little bit earlier before this call, and you told me that you only need like less than 10% of students at a university or college to sign up for the platform before it starts going viral. Why is the number so low that you need it, and how are you able to go viral after just having a small amount of students up front?
So this obviously varies. The 5 to 10% number, though, at a large university is still a fair number of students. If we're at a 50,000 person university, that's 2,500 to 5,000 students on the platform. So it's not a non-zero number of folks on the platform before things start to rip. I think the reflection for us is two things. One, we see this all the time in consumer, and we probably experience it ourselves. It takes multiple impressions or exposures to a new app or a new opportunity before you get over the fence and you try it. In kind of business school parlance, this would almost be like crossing the chasm in a way, where you have some early adopters who are willing to try anything, but how can you actually get kind of the early majority onto the platform? And to us, the 5 to 10% is the early adopters. The early majority is the next 20+%. So it takes your friend trying this thing, having that magical experience of unwrapping a brand for the first time, going and trying that brand, often with a friend based on the games that we build on the platform, and then getting a Venmo back for that sort of loop to want to download it yourself. So it's multiple exposure, and then it's trust and brand recognition. And we've borrowed a lot from BeReal on this as well in their playbook for launching on college campuses. But it takes enough of your friends having a positive experience and seeing Claim fulfill its obligations to reward you for brand discovery to be able to download the app. And part of that is around the data privacy work that we do. The reason that we can be so powerful both for consumers and brands is because we're able to, on a transaction level, identify places you haven't been before. And a lot of our consumers think, oh, is Claim going to sell our data? And the answer emphatically is absolutely not. We are not selling consumer data at all, full stop. We only use that to find places that you haven't been before, to see that you've actually shopped at that place, and to find new places that you're going to like going forward. And so that trust aspect, which is so core to attacking some of the problems from the marketing perspective around attribution, is something that we look to build on these campuses. We see that tipping point around 5 to 10%.
You mentioned games. What are some of those games that are helping with engagement on the platform?
Yeah, let me offer two. So for Valentine's Day, we launched what we call Half Heart. And basically we gave everyone on the platform either a left half of a heart to go get a coffee with somebody else. It was worth about $5 to $6, I want to say, or a left half or a right half of a heart, excuse me. And so it created this virtual game where whether or not you wanted to go with a friend or maybe a crush, which is kind of our ideal, you had to trade around to make sure that you had the complimentary heart. And so I didn't mention this earlier, but when you get these sort of claims, we call them, these cards to go try a brand for the first time based on your past spend, you can trade them on the platform. And that creates a lot of interesting consumer behaviors. It's a killer feature for us. But we wanted to use trading to create a world in which people were actively talking about and finagling for these hearts so they could go together with somebody. So that's one. What we did on Tuesday actually is essentially launch Pokemon Go for brands, for brand discovery. And so what that looked like is we'd send everyone a text, the drop's here, go to this point on campus and unwrap your reward with other people that are there. We did this in Boston. Our team was on the ground there, and we saw these groups of students looking at their phones. It's how we could identify them. We see them tracking towards the radius, and then there'd be these audible moments of delight where they'd be yelling at each other what they got. Hey, did you get this? Did you get this? You want to go? Let's go. We had one student clear an entire flight of stairs to make it into the radius to kind of check in and unwrap his claim at that time. And so these are some of the games we're testing in terms of blending single player with multiplayer, in terms of blending digital with, IRL or physical world, that all come back to kind of the key theme of brand discovery, and brand discovery is best done through your friends.
I want to touch on the other side of the marketplace, which is the brands, really quickly. I've noticed over time that changing consumer behavior, basically any type of change of behavior is pretty difficult to do. How do you convince brands to go from those legacy platforms like Google Ads, Facebook Ads, to then your platform, Claim?
Yeah, I would say an indirect conversation that we have is around friction. Friction to getting a consumer to try a new thing is really high. We can actually price it in a way because we know that it's going to be a higher value required to get you out of bed in the morning to go walk across town and try a new place. So it's friction for the consumer, which I think a lot of marketers understand. And then for us, it's a question of how can we reduce friction to a brand partner trying claim for the first time. And let me kind of describe that. What we do for our brand partners is we say, hey, what are you willing to pay for a new customer? Let's get some benchmarking done on your status quo. And a lot of our partners will tell us, hey, look, we are beholden to Facebook. We are beholden to Instagram. The algorithm is capricious. We are looking to diversify away. These are our current cost per acquisition numbers. We say, great. We're not going to charge you anything up front. We're going to go out, with your blessing and bring a lot of great new customers through your doors or through your checkout flow for the first time. And then afterwards, we'll report back on the customers that we brought in, the number of customers, the value kind of delivered to the brand. Again, I'll note here from a consumer perspective, no personal information is ever shared with the brand, but we're able to, on a very data-driven level, provide that sort of proof to brands that they lack because we have the credit card transactions to prove it. They can't get that on any other platform with that level of sophistication. And so there's really no downside to brands working with Claim. There are no integrations. We don't require any technical lift, no staff retraining. We're not touching checkout flows. We're not touching physical lines and processes in person. We've just been really excited by marketers' willingness to try a new thing, see the results, and then refer their peers in the industry to Claim.
And today, how many users are you signing up on the platform on like every week or every day? What are those numbers breaking down to be like?
Yeah, every day we're in the thousands at this point. High hundreds, low thousands is kind of our run rate. For us, it's not a growth at all costs question. We have an invite channel in Slack, which is actually fun because I know, Seamus, when I go back to this after the episode, it'll be kind of gratifying to see the register come in. But if we were trying to make this as large as possible, we would do probably two things. One, we would expand to more campuses. We would allow list more .edu addresses. We also probably would consider moving off of college campuses if we wanted to really get as big as possible. And again, I think that separates us from platforms of late, BeReal, Laps, most recently, obviously the big legacy incumbents. But our goal is not to get as fast as possible on the consumer side. Our goal is to reach critical mass on these different campuses, be able to take that captive audience of great Gen Z consumers, allow brands to access those Gen Z consumers, and start to let this marketplace balance over time. And so I do imagine the next few months we're going to take the guardrails off more and more. But for now, we're pretty excited about the pace of growth.
Why is your goal not to grow super large at first and instead do it in stages? Why is that?
Yeah, this is the blessing and the curse of being something in between a consumer social company and a fintech, right? Is consumer social company, the roadmap is get big quickly, figure out monetization down the road. For us, we have the benefit of monetization earlier on, but until we figure out essentially the unit economics or the company equation, and we really refine that company equation, if we grew to 10 million students or users tomorrow, I'm not confident that we have perfectly figured out the math there to account for that as a company. And I think we will, in the near future. But until we do that, I think we're better served by a velocity of learning in these sort of constrained environments than we are of growth at all costs. And I would note that in any marketplace, a company needs to prioritize one side or the other. We call it the shifting bottleneck. Is the bottleneck for us on the consumer side, or is it on the merchant side of this platform? And you can look at great companies like Airbnb who emphasized one side or the other towards becoming a stabilized marketplace. For us, our thesis right now is if we're able to get to enough consumers and build a consumer experience that people love, then we're going to bring the right brand partners onto the platform, which will then start to create the flywheel of two-sided network effects that we're looking for.
And you mentioned monetization. There are some apps that have, grown super big, like Clubhouse, had millions of users, and then they just realized there wasn't actually a business model there. What's your business model? How do you guys make money?
Yeah, I mean, this is where we have a ton of prior art to pull from, and we can play to the very old and reliable and dated business models of the giants, right? So we don't monetize consumers. We want consumers to use this platform. We want consumers to feel safe and know that we're not selling their data. We're trying to build a better advertising model. And so if I'm a brand, the way I think about this is if I have $1, my status quo is I can buy ads, or you can essentially give it straight to new customers on claim. It's taking that ad, and a brand would have bought an ad. They're instead giving that value to a customer. You can think of it almost as a virtual free sample in a way. And when they do that, it gives the customer the chance to directly experience the brand, experience the product and everything that that brand manager or that CMO is obsessed over, which is a better experience for the customer. They've now had that full experience. It's a better experience for the brand because they have higher attribution and frankly, usually more efficient outcomes. It's a better experience for claim to really be that sort of distribution mechanism that exists. And again, I would just harken back to the reason claim matters is because advertising is broken and consumers are more disillusioned than ever with advertising, with influencers, etc. They didn't grow up with these things, especially our Gen Z folks. And so they are looking for a new, more authentic way to do things together. And that's what Claim provides, is a newer and more authentic way to do things together. And so to answer your question, Seamus, on monetization, we structure our partnerships such that brands are paying us for new customers in the same way that they'd pay the incumbents for new customers. We're just doing it in a more authentic and reliable way.
Got it. And this might be going a little off track, but I am curious. To do this, you and hire top talent, you obviously need some level of capital, which you raised through venture funding. So you raised at the peak of the VC market a couple of years ago, and more recently, when the market was in a trough, you just raised a seed round by Sequoia. What has been like the most important lessons that you've learned in that fundraising process to raise money when capital is flush, but also when capital is more limited?
Yeah, I would say at the outset, what I kind of tell other founders who are thinking about raising capital is first understand what kind of business you want to build and what are the pros and cons of various sources of capital. In the venture world, when you do raise at the top of the market or a more frothy, capital-rich environment, and you raise at the other end of the spectrum, you do learn some hard lessons. And so, to me, I think it's finding the right investors who are values aligned and vision aligned is more important than ever. A lesson that I learned is it's going to be hard, if not near impossible, to convince an investor who doesn't believe or have overlap with your view of the world or your thesis that your company is best suited to attack that problem. They might not even believe that that problem is worth attacking due to scar tissue or skeletons in that closet or their own lived experience, and that's totally fine. But what I think you want to be doing, or at least our experience, was being hyper-targeted, finding investors that have an existing thesis, that have worked with other great companies adjacent or similar to yours, or that have attacked hard problems with a similar level of uncertainty or new categories, are the best conversations. And I could often find during the fundraising process that within the first 5 minutes, I knew whether this was going to be a good conversation or not. And that's no disrespect to the person or people that I was speaking with, but you can tell if you and the investor can start dreaming together early on. Hey, have you thought about this? What about this? Have you considered this? That's very different than, what is your current DAO MAU? Tell me about cash burn. The typical questions that should come up in any diligence process, I found to be back-weighted in good conversations.
You've raised your seed round from Sequoia just recently. I know Sequoia doesn't really do a lot of consumer investments. How did you get inside the table there?
Yeah, certainly not recently. Obviously, Sequoia is an incredibly storied fund who invested early in Apple, Google, WhatsApp, Instagram, the list goes on. So very fortunate to work with them. And candidly, when we walked into their office in Menlo Park and you see the big Sequoia tree and you see all the term sheets of the first investments they made in these, iconic companies, it was a little bit of a imposter syndrome or pinch yourself moment. And so I would say that, going back to the fundraising tactics that we mentioned, we found two truly values aligned and vision aligned partners in Josephine Chen and Jess Lee at Sequoia. And from the first conversation, it was dreaming. It was understanding what are the dream scenarios? What could we build here? How could we transform how consumers interact with one another, how brands and consumers interact? It was very much a generative, energy-giving discussion. The way that we were introduced to Sequoia, as I mentioned, was we were able to find somebody who would vouch for us, say, hey, this company's worth your time. Maybe you should just spend a little bit of time hearing what they have to say. And since then, it's been a partnership that's blossomed. But especially in the last year or so, we truly understand how fortunate we are because capital is expensive right now, and capital is difficult to come by, and certainly from a top-tier venture firm. And that's why we're working our hardest to go make the future that we're building together a reality.
You hyper-target your investors. How do you do that? What do you do to hyper-target investors?
Yeah, I mean, there's a classic strategy when you're running a fundraising process where you want to be targeted because you don't want the opportunity to feel like it's being shopped around everywhere. And so there's a sequencing element of it of, hey, we want to go for these firms first, get their opinions, rope them in, hopefully get some traction, hopefully get some term sheets, and then go to the next kind of wave and end up with a hot round or a competitive environment. A hot round in 2022, 2023 is a little bit less common than a hot round in 21. But the way that I would look at it is, hey, who are investors that are writing actively about the space, even if it's not aligned with our view of the space, or who are investors who have a enduring thesis about social commerce, for example, or about advertising or about consumer social, finding those people and then crucially finding a warm introduction to those people. I think most investors will say, hey, my DMs are open, on Twitter or the like. The reality is that an investor at a tier one VC these days is getting exposed to thousands of pitches per year, is evaluating actively hundreds of companies per year, and is only making a handful of investments. And so the networking aspect of this is real. You'd be much better served taking the extra time to figure out if you can get just a warm intro via email or whatever to an investor, because in their mind, I would bet you that they would place incrementally more weight on the conversation that you're going to have. And therefore, the sort of luck surface area that you're creating in a way is increasing. And therefore, your probability of getting a good round done is increasing.
I guess to wrap it up, we have a couple of last questions that we like to end with. One is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Yeah, good question. It's happened a couple times, including one recently from a friend. But essentially the advice is take a step back and have some perspective. And what I mean by that is every founder, every entrepreneur, whether it's a small business or a venture-backed startup, feels the grind, feels the uncertainty, feels the stress. I certainly have been quite stressed out, candidly. And that's okay, because what these friends help me do is realize the context for what we're doing. It's a tremendous opportunity to wake up, go to work, today with the Claim team, a team of really passionate, curious, vibrant, smart people, and get to work with those people every day. That's first and foremost. To be able to attack a $100 billion plus opportunity, and create a generational, potentially, world-changing company, that's pretty massive. To have really great investors on our side, like Sequoia, like SUSE, like Box Group, is a great honor. To have students who love our app so much, to have brands that love the platform so much, to have that sort of traction. And so essentially what it helped me do, this advice, was to pull myself out of, I wouldn't say a dark place by any stretch, but certainly a place of stress, and realize what a great opportunity we have. And maybe zooming out one step further, Seamus, what a great opportunity we have in the United States as well, to have the liberties, the freedoms, the potential for economic mobility. Obviously, there are a ton of horrible things going on in the world, and there are a ton of horrible things going on in the United States. But what a blessing, what a privilege it is to be a founder and go try to make your mark in some small way on the world. And I think that for me was a sobering and important reminder, and it makes me more thankful every day.
And the one question we like to close it with is, if I slid you over a phone and you could call your 18-year-old self, would you call? And if so, what would you say?
Do a lot of people say they wouldn't call? Is that a common answer?
It's 50-50.
That's fascinating. I don't know. As a quick aside here, when I try to make decisions, what's worked well for me is to minimize regret minimization. It's how I made decisions about where I went to school, big life decisions, personally, et cetera, company-wide decisions. I know it's kind of a fun exercise, but I would regret not taking the opportunity to grab the phone from you and call my 18-year-old self. So therefore, I would do it. What I would say is, this is personal, but I'd say, hey, don't drink. And let me explain more. I think the world, whether it's Huberman or various other commentators, scientific literature, I think we're understanding more and more how bad alcohol is for us physiologically. It reminds me of smoking. And sure, I socialized in college, business school, whatever. I quit drinking a year or so ago entirely for no other reason than health and mental clarity. And I feel the best I have ever felt in my adult life. And so I'd call my 18-year-old self and say, hey, look, try to push the peer pressure off. Find another way, find another outlet to socialize. You don't need alcohol. Because I wonder, I wasn't a heavy drinker, but I wonder what it would have been like. There are so many other ways to stretch your mind, stretch your creativity. Why would you poison it?
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great way to end it. Thank you very much, Sam, for taking the time to join the show. We'll have a link to Claim in the episode description. If you happen to be one of the supported campuses, you can download it and check it out. And thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Seamus. This is really fun.